Okay guys, working on the Chapter 7 review about quadratics, okay? We are not sketching, sorry about that, we're just solving, okay? We're actually solving the two methods that we've used. So we've factored to find the x-intercepts, and we've used the quadratic formula to find the x-intercepts. But the first thing I want to do is I'd like you to try to take on questions 1 and 2. Now question 2 is just like number 1, we're just going to pick out the important piece of information. What is the y-intercept, what is the direction opening, and why? Okay, well the y-intercept is always going to be that c value or that constant. So if I zoom in up here, my y-intercept, remember it's a coordinate, it's a point, but if that c value is -3, then it's going to be 0, -3. Next it asks, what is the opening direction? Well that's always based off the a value, whether it's positive or negative. And I know you guys know that it's a positive 1, so that means that the opening direction is going to be up. Now your reason would be is because a is positive. Or you could say lead coefficient is positive, or 1 is positive. The number in front of x squared is positive, anything like that. Okay? Next what you're going to do is for the rest of the questions, you're going to factor each of the following as completely as possible. Now if it says that it's factorable, that means that the discriminant is a perfect square. Okay, so we do not have to check for these questions. Okay? It is a perfect square. So what that means on your notes is that you can start right on a times c. Okay? Then it says either solve for x or leave in factored form when appropriate. This is what we struggle with on the quiz. If it's an expression, then you leave it in factored form. If it's an equation, then you can actually solve for the x-intercepts. So let's take a look at the first one. X squared plus 7x plus 8 equals 0. That means it's an equation, so if I look down at the bottom of this question, it says, are there solutions? Yes, there are solutions. It's an equation. Okay? Before we jump into number 3, take a look at number 4. 2x squared minus 13x plus 15. There's no equal sign, so it's an expression. What that means is there are no solutions. So my final answer is going to be one factor multiplied by another factor. And remember that a quadratic is made up of two linear factors multiplied by each other. So these should be two linears multiplied by each other. So now let's take a look at 3. X squared. So the substitute should have told you that we're going to change this positive 8 to a negative 8, because then it wouldn't be factorable. So okay, so if we rewrite this, it's going to be x squared plus 7x minus 8 equals 0. So now if you're looking at step 3, the first thing you can do is you can write out your a, your b, and your c, which is now a negative 8. Okay, so keep that in mind. This is now a negative 8. Okay? And then we got to see, well, what two numbers multiply to a times c? Well, a times c is negative 8, so I'm going to write out the factors of negative 8. If a number is a negative, that means it's got to be a positive times a negative. So I have 1 times negative 1 times positive 8, and I could do positive 1 times negative 8, 2 times negative 4, negative 2 times positive 4, and there's actually no other options here. Then I need to figure out which one of these factors in this group right here adds to the b value, positive 7. Well, if I look, positive 8 minus 1, or plus a negative 1, equals 7. So those are going to be the two factors that I use. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my quadratic, x squared plus 7x minus 8 equals 0, and I'm going to split that middle term. Remember, the only way we can group using our GCF, or factoring by grouping, is if we have 4 terms. So I have to bring down the first term, x squared, split up the middle term into that positive 8x minus 1x, and then bring down that last term, minus 8 equals 0. Now I have 4 terms. Okay? So then I'm going to factor out my grouping. My GCF from both groups. X squared and 8x, I can factor out an x. What I'm left with is x plus 8, because I took away 1x from here and this x right here. I factored out, I undistributed. Whenever you see a negative, we should always factor that out. So there's no like terms or GCFs between negative 1 and negative 8 besides just negative 1. So what I'm left with is I took away that negative 1 from the negative 1x, so I'm left with just x. And take away negative from the positive 8, and that gives you, or from the negative 8, and that gives you positive 8. So if you notice, we have the same thing in the parentheses. So what that means is this was one of the tough things for people. The first factor comes from x minus 1. And the second factor comes from x plus 8. This is factored form, x minus 1 times x plus 8 in the parentheses. And then it says, are there solutions? Yes, there are solutions. So we need to set these equal to 0. Add 1, minus 8, minus 8. So x equals 1, x equals negative 8. So if I want solutions, you can either write them as positive 1, negative 8, or if we're talking about x-intercepts, let's talk about positive 1, positive 1 comma 0, and negative 8 comma 0. Okay, so question number 4 is going to be the exact same thing. You're just going to have to stop at the factoring step. Okay, we're going to do a few on the back side. Question number 5. It says, is it an expression or an equation? Well, x squared minus 121, there's no equal sign, so it's an expression. That means there are no solutions. Okay, but remember, we only know how to factor trinomials. And if you notice, there's the x squared term, and it has the constant, but what it's missing is the x. So we're going to write in that x. Okay, and then it's the exact same thing we just did. Multiply a times c, which is negative 121. And find all the factors. Well, positive 11, negative 11. And you could do 121 and 1. Okay? So now I need to find two numbers out of those factors that add to 0. Well, positive 11 minus 11 is 0. So those are my two factors. Now check this out. X squared, I'm going to split up that middle term into 11x minus 11x minus 121 equals 0. And now I got my factor by grouping. Let's factor out our GCF. X can be pulled out of x squared, and x can be pulled out of 11, so I'm left with x plus 11. I'm going to take out this negative 11, because that's a 121. Remember, 121 divided by 11 is 11. So I can take out negative 11 here, and I'm left with x plus 11. And now I got my two factors, x minus 11, which is on the outside, what we factored out, and x plus 11, which is on the inside. That's what was shared between the two GCFs. And there is no equation. I'm sorry for that. I didn't mean to put it in equals 0. It's not an equation, so that means that is my factored form. X minus 11, x plus 11. Okay, question 6. Okay, it looks a little different. 2x squared minus 10x equals 0. Well, there's an equal sign, so it's got to be an equation. That means I'm going to have solutions. Okay, but there's only two terms here. Remember that we took a trinomial. We split up the middle term to make 4 terms so we could group by 2's. Well, if you notice, both of these have an x. There's only two terms here, so what we're going to do is we're going to actually look at this step right here where we factored out the GCF, and that's exactly what we're going to do to these two terms. So what is the GCF of 2x squared and 10x? Well, I can take a 2 away from both 2 and 10, and I can take one of the x's away. And what I'm left with is x minus 5. Now remember, how do we get the 5? Well, if I redistribute, 2x times negative 5 is going to be the negative 10x, so we're all good. And now what you notice is normally we have two linear binomials, but they're only two terms. So that means we have a monomial times a binomial, but they're still linear. That's why we got a quadratic. So now what we can do is we can just get to that step where we have our two factors, set them both equal to 0, and solve. I'm going to divide by 2, 0 divided by anything is 0, add 5, 0 plus 5 is 5. So my factored form was 2x times x minus 5, and then my solutions are 0, 0, and 5, 0. Last question I want to do together with you is the quadratic formula. Some of you guys need to label out what is A, what is B, and what is C. So now I'm going to plug it in my formula. X equals the opposite of negative 7, which is positive 7, plus or minus the square root. B squared, put that negative 7 in parentheses, squared, because remember, negative times a negative is going to be a positive, minus 4 times A, which is 6, times C, which is negative 3, all over 2 times A, which is 6. I'm writing a little bigger so I can make it really clear. Now we're going to simplify what's inside that radical. Well, 7 squared, or negative 7 squared, is going to be 49. Then negative 4 times 3 gives me, or sorry, negative 4 times negative 3 gives me a positive 12, times 6 is going to give me a positive 72, all over 2 times 6, which is 12. Combine your like terms, I get 7 plus or minus the square root of 121, all over 12. Okay, well, square root of 121, if you want to check in your calculator, it actually simplifies to 11. So now I have x equals 7 plus or minus 11 all over 12. Okay, I'm going to zoom out a little bit. I'm going to create my two different answers, 7 plus 11 over 12, and 7 minus 11 over 12. Simplify both answers. 7 plus 11 is 18 over 12, and 7 minus 11 is negative 4 over 12. Simplify both fractions if you can. 18 divided by 12, 4 goes in, nope, 6 goes into both, so that simplifies to 3 over 2. And negative 4 over 12, 4 goes, and negative 4 over 12, 4 goes into both of those, so that can simplify to negative 1 over 3. And these are my two answers. Okay, so if you want to put your solutions up here, you could write them as 3 over 2 comma 0 as an x-intercept, just like that. Okay, guys, so use those notes from class. We got our factoring notes, we got our quadratic formula notes, and then try the other questions if you can. Good luck, guys.